I will go through this home ventilation topics from a developer's perspective, and first some words about the story of Selvaag Bolig. Then you said something around the changes around home ventilation nowadays. I will look a little bit back and talk a little bit about how it's changed over time. And then I will say something about the customers' expectations, and then how we can see the future in home ventilation. Selvaag Bolig is one of Norway's leading developers. We have delivered nearly 60,000 homes over the last 70 years. So we've been around for a while, and we have made some homes. We have always been a city builder and have an aim of offering cost-effective houses for reasonable prices. This started out with duplexes and row houses, and moved on to terraced houses and quite large house systems. We have always been developing projects with several hundred apartments each project. So like to make neighborhoods and suburbs have been kind of the what we have had in mind all the way. Right now, our focus are on large cities in Norway, around Oslo and Bergen, Stavanger, and Trondheim, and we are also present in Stockholm. The story of Selvaag Bolig is more or less a story of development. It started out in 1948 with a duplex, shown here. On next page, you will see a big picture of this duplex. This house was built for half of the cost, half of the use of material than ordinary buildings. And Olav Selvaag, founder of the company, he had a slogan saying it's better to build 30,000 homes for the cost of 15,000 kroner each than to build 15,000 homes for 30,000 kroner. And that's been kind of essential in the development all the time. In the beginning and in the 50s and 60s, it was lack of materials, and there was very few focus on material efficiency. Then later on in the 70s and 80s, it's moved on to be really industrialized production, and the goal was to build as many homes as possible with the available resources. It's more or less like the million home program in Sweden. Norway were building also a lot of homes through the 70s and 80s. Materials and productions are no longer the limited resource. It's been more and more obvious that the limited resource in the future will be, and it always building plots in urban attractive areas for people. That comes down to that we want to build more dense and higher buildings, and build wherever it's more noise and more crowded areas. And we believe that this will lead to other solutions to solve indoor climate for these buildings. This is a story about affordable homes. Selvaag have all the way challenged regulations and standards. Right now, the challenge is urban sustainable development. And here it will be more and more focused on how to build this needed homes on this limited land, and and it's all the things we struggle with in the old time with materials and production capacity. That's no longer the issue to struggle with. So we see that how we provide energy efficient indoor climate in new homes located on these polluted and noisy areas will be one of the things we have to look into, and how the regulations are today with different things will be things that has to be challenged, and this ventilation has to be optimized with energy use for heating and cooling and taking heat to tap water and so on. So we have joined this development program in order to be in this process of finding the new way of making good indoor climate in homes. Home ventilation has changed over time, but it has been more or less unchanged until we, for the last 10 years, introduced balanced ventilation with heat recovery. Until the mid-80s, the focus in the regulation was to supply fresh air to a room with fireplace, and it was required to have a window that you could open in bedrooms and living rooms, and it should be some kind of duct from the kitchen up above the ceiling, so it could by natural or heat-driven ventilation take polluted air out of the kitchen. Our regulations in the 80s and 90s was very functional. It said quite easy that you should have proper ventilation for the room and for the people in the room, and each room should have a ventilation based on its function. And kitchen and sanitary rooms should have some kind of air exhaust, but there were no requirement of having a fan. Anyway, in the 70s, it started to be more and more common to put in exhaust fans in multifamily houses, because you got bedrooms, now got bathrooms in the middle of the building and without any windows, so you needed to have some forced ventilation to get out this moist air and the polluted air. But until the regulation in 2007, inlet air, cold inlet air through opening in walls or through windows was the way of getting in air. Then the energy regulations in 2007 forced or gave us the balanced ventilation, and now we will probably go further on and have even much better balanced ventilation system for the future. The next slide is about the requirement nowadays. Kari went through more or less all of this points, so I will go quite fast through it. But one thing to mention is that today's regulations in Norway for dwellings or for apartments are less than for other buildings, and one of the reasons is that the dwellings are have the possibility of ventilating the rooms through windows and doors, and the amount of inhabitants is much lower per square meter than in other buildings. And people are living there in their own poisoned air, so they don't feel that it's less ventilated than it might need, because they are used to having the same smell around them all the time. The decrease in air change will can nowadays be solved by opening a window if the air quality and noise outside it's okay. And but I believe the tomorrow apartments, we will build them in places with the outdoor climate that we can't use the windows. So we have to step up with the amount of ventilation, so we can live inside without being dependent on opening windows in order to get the right climate inside. And then, what does the customer expect from the indoor climate? Most customers, as we see, they quite simply just expect that they have a ventilation system that functions, that give them the fresh air and exhaust the polluted air. And they don't really care about air change rates or fresh air amounts and anything like that. And they don't really care about the ventilation systems. But our experience is that it's much easier to handle in the warranty period to have centralized ventilation systems where everything can be maintained in one place for several apartments than to have one unit in each apartment. But the experience differs for sure from developer to developer, but as we have tried both and see centralized as kind of the easiest thing to handle. In general, we see that the possibility of opening window is something that everyone expects, and I believe most Norwegians sleep with an open bedroom window, even though more and more don't do it because they are more allergic and need to have filtered air to sleep well. We experience also a decrease in claims due to high temperature in apartments. During the summer, when we have long period with the warm weather, it isn't enough to ventilate with the ventilation system for sure. And even though opening windows don't help enough, because it's not possible to get the air to flow through the apartment. So, and people, they expect comfort beyond the day's delivery, and I believe a lot of people want to have possibilities to adjust the temperature and the airflow like they can do in their cars, with cooling and quite heavy cooling if they come into the apartment and it's overheated. So tomorrow customers will demand energy efficient heating and cooling in their homes, and our responsibility is to design and develop systems that solve that for them. And for sure, we have to realize that tomorrow customers will like to have cooling, and there we force one of the challenges with the aiming for BREEAM certificated buildings, where there you gain points with not having a cooling. But we have to see how can we make energy efficient cooling system. So what do we see as the possible scenarios for home ventilation in the future? For sure, urban dwellings will be designed with ventilation that don't demand opening of windows. We have to make it efficient enough so we can live in there without opening the window to get in fresh air. If you want to hear the noise of the city and kind of participate in the city, you will open the window or the balcony door. But if you want to have the quiet and cool apartment, it should be possible without opening. So in addition to the basic function of ventilation, supply air and to exhaust polluted air, we need to use the ventilation system for heating and cooling of the apartment. And the ventilation system will be more than the ventilation system. They will be the main system for heating and cooling. And this this cooling energy has to be recovered in one way or another back to the hot tap water. Hot tap water, you have a use of that all year, and the amount is more or less the same all year. So there is a possibility of use the energy there. Heating with ventilation air is not very common, and it's very discussed. So, and that has to be limited. So, as a base heating, we can use the ventilation air based on district heating. Then you have water-based district heating coming for the rest of the tap water heating and for some of the ventilation heating. And then you use the peak heating by electricity. That's how I see the most reasonable way of making not only ventilation but the whole heating, cooling, and ventilation system in the apartments in future.